Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a mini set review for the Lorwyn Eclipsed bonus sheet and a quick reaction to the pre-bans that just got announced yesterday as well. So this isn't going to be a set review for the entire set. I'm going to be doing a separate video for the main set, either in a few days or early next week, depending on how I get on with other videos. So that is going to be coming, but for this video I thought I would just focus on the bonus sheet, especially because we did get the pre-bans announced yesterday, and also, you know, historically or very recently, a lot of the best cards for Historic have come in the bonus sheets. And obviously, because there aren't that many cards in the bonus sheet, it gives me an opportunity to look at all of the new, the new to Arena ones as well. So this video is just going to be focused on the bonus sheet, and I'll have a main set video coming out in the next few days as well. But anyway, let's start off here by having a look at the pre-bans. So if you didn't see this, Wizards announced yesterday that 2 of the bonus sheet cards are going to get pre-banned, and they are Devoted Druid and Painter's Servant. And I'm just going to quickly read through their rationale for it and tell you what I think of it as well. So they said, although Devoted Druid is a modest mana creature when played fairly, it has its own share of combo applications and has been a centerpiece of creature combo in formats such as Modern with cards like Vizier of Remedies. So I'm sure if you know about Devoted Druid or you played Modern at all, you know about this interaction. Basically, just enables you to produce infinite mana with Devoted Druid if it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, because every time you put a counter on it, it gets kind of cancelled out by the Vizier, and then you can just keep untapping it and producing green infinitely. So it says, Devoted Druid combos may be in an acceptable power band for Historic, but the play experience of having to repeatedly activate Devoted Druid to generate mana makes it undesirable as a key player in the format. Now this I don't really understand, because I feel like this would be very few clicks, right? You tap Devoted Druid for mana and then you just click to activate it. It doesn't seem any worse than, you know, combos at the moment like Brood Scale, where you have to sacrifice a spawn token and then click confirm to get another one, and then, you know, you produce the infinite mana and then cast a win condition. It seems very similar to that. So this I don't really understand. Not even to mention, you know, I think the biggest offender in this of all time in Historic is probably the Ominous Traveler decks. I'm sure if you played the Trap Finder decks before that got nerfed, where you have to literally play against the clock, go Ominous Traveler, bounce it back, cast another thing, sacrifice it to Ashnod's Altar. It's such a nightmare compared to this. Now, if they'd said the card, you know, in the decks that Devoted Druid Vizier of Remedies is played in, the win conditions will likely be tutor effects like Nature's Rhythm, Green Sun Zenith, Chord of Calling, and then the way you win from there is usually by pumping the infinite mana into something like Duskwatch Recruiter, or when I was theory crafting decks, I was looking at cards like Thrasios, which you can get off all 3 tutors, and then you pump 4 mana into it and look at the top card of your deck. If they'd said the issue is with that, then that makes a lot more sense, because say you're using Duskwatch Recruiter, you'd have to produce 3 mana, activate the Duskwatch Recruiter, look at the top 3 cards, pick one, keep going, just do that over and over again. Same thing with Thrasios. So if that's their reasoning, that typically the cards that you're going to be playing to sink the infinite mana into would take a really long time, then that makes sense to me. But they worded it differently to make it sound like it's the Devoted Druid itself that's going to be the problem. But this, if that is the issue, that kind of makes sense to me. And they've said, we are happy with creature combo strategies existing and being viable in Historic, but Devoted Druid falls on the side of being powerful while creating a poor user experience. For that reason, it's pre-banned. So again, I don't agree that Devoted Druid itself is the issue, but I get their point, right? They don't want to tell you how to build the deck. I guess their issue is they don't want players to sit there whilst the Devoted Druid players are taking forever to pump mana into Duskwatch Recruiter or their Thrasios or whatever. So that makes sense. In terms of the power level, it is very similar to Val, which is obviously one of the best combo decks right now. The big downside of Devoted Druid compared to Val, though, is that you need to have Devoted Druid without Summoning Sickness, which really limits your ability to combo on an empty board. One of the big strengths of Val is you can literally just go, you know, Tralisara Zenith, and then, you know, just any other card, Forsaken Crossroads or whatever, to go off from a completely empty board. Now, having said that, there are some also upsides of Devoted Druid, right? It makes it easier to combo once you've got it set up, right? There are situations where you put all of your mana into Val and then don't have a card to get it going, or don't have enough mana to get the combo going, whereas if you have Devoted Druid plus Vizier, all you need is a card in your hand to go off. Not to mention, Vizier and Devoted Druid also works very well with Nature's Rhythm, which we got quite recently, because if you have Devoted Druid that doesn't have Summoning Sickness, you can Nature's Rhythm for Vizier, and then Nature's Rhythm is immediately in your graveyard, so then you can just make infinite mana, pump that into Nature's Rhythm to then get your win condition, whatever that may be. But it makes sense, right? If people are going to be pumping the infinite mana into small creatures like Thrasios or Duskwatch Recruiter, that is going to be a nightmare to play against. So this, I kind of understand. And then they've said Painter 7 as well is a card with mostly non-interactive applications. It is notably combos with Grindstone. So if you haven't seen this, which I'm sure most Magic players know this because it's such an iconic combo, but basically choose a colour with Painter Servant and then Grindstone, because all the cards in the opponent's deck will be that colour, will just mill the opponent out, forming a cheap, easy to assemble instant win combo. Since the pieces are both artifacts, the strategy gains great consistency in the form of tutors and recursion. In the interest of moderating the strength of non-interactive combos in Historic, Painter Servant is pre-banned. Now this one makes more sense to me as well because it's a 2-card combo that is colourless. You can literally run this in every single deck, and it's kind of reminiscent of Saurian Lender in that it's just probably the best 2-card combo you can run. There are tutors for these, like in my MTG Zone Premium article that I wrote very recently, I did Theorycraft decks built around these cards in Historic, and unfortunately I wrote this before the pre-bans were announced, so I'll have a link to it down in the description if you want to check it out. But unfortunately 3 of the 5 decks that I wrote about don't work because 2 of them were Devoted Druid and 1 of them was Painter Servant in Historic. So if you want to see how I would have built those decks, check it out. And also, if you want to see my Theorycraft decks built around Manamorphose and Slippery Bogle, feel free to check it out as well. But basically, like, one of the decks, or one of the first times that I was excited to try this out in Historic was Affinity, where you can run the 3-mana Tezzeret that can tutor it, and obviously these work very well with Emery and stuff like that as well. But I completely understand this, right? It just having a generic, literally generic, because you can run it in any color combination, 2-card combo that isn't that much mana investment and does immediately win you the game, feels too strong. Now there obviously is some counterplay, Pithing Needle on Grindstone, sideboard Emrakul the Aeon's Torn to stop you milling it out as well. But again, I don't really want this super easy generic 2-card combo that any deck can run. So these 2 make sense to me. I am a little bit surprised that they didn't also pre-ban Manamorphose, which is the first card I'm going to look at, because this card is, I mean, it's not a free spell because you have to pay 2 mana for it, but it is, in the decks that care about Manamorphose, it is a free spell. It does enable Storm decks potentially. It also works with prowess creatures similar to how Mishra's Bauble works, which is also a card that was pre-banned in Historic as well. So, but to be honest, I'm kind of happy they didn't pre-ban Manamorphose as well, because outside of that, I think Devoted Druid, Painter Servant, and Manamorphose were the 3 strongest cards, so it would be kind of a bummer to have them all pre-banned, if that makes sense. But yeah, I definitely do agree with those. Next up, I'm just going to have a look at the rest of the cards, starting off with the ones that I think are more impactful, and then we'll get more towards the fringe ones as we go. But starting off with Manamorphose, like I said, and I'm really excited about this because I do think it has multiple applications. So in terms of decks that it just slots straight into, I'm not sure if Lotus Field would want this. It does just make the deck much more streamlined, right? It makes just easier to dig towards your other cards as well. Outside of that, you've obviously got prowess decks. Is it Wizards again? I mean, Is It Wizards definitely took a really big hit with the Swift Spear's Teachings nerf, but I do think Manamorphose in sort of prowess style decks, whether that's Is It Wizards or a more low to the ground build, maybe you could do mono red, maybe you could do Gruul as well, but this seems like a really nice card at just basically triggering your creatures very easily. And then additionally, it does potentially enable Ruby Storm in Historic as well. Now, obviously, Seething Song was pre-banned. We don't have any of the rituals that the modern versions do, so being completely reliant on Manamorphose to combo off does seem a little risky. But we do have Underworld Breach legal in Historic. It's one of the only Eternal formats where Breach is still legal, which is significantly better than Past in Flames, which is what, the modern version runs. So if you're not familiar with the deck, you basically run Ruby Medallion and the 2-mana Ral that both discount your instants and sorceries, and then you would use spells like Manamorphose to combo off and just start producing a bunch of mana. Now, obviously, the issue is a lack of redundancy for this sort of deck, for sure, because we don't have the rituals. In the past, I have seen people try it out with Burgi and Strike It Rich as a way to generate mana, and then obviously you've got Breach to go off. You can run Dragon's Rage Channeler to fill the graveyard for Breach as well. Manamorphose does provide you some redundancy, but again, we don't have any of the rituals, so that's a little risky. So the one way I was thinking that could work is if you use Gamble, because Gamble, I mean, obviously it's very risky having to run Gamble because it makes you discard a card at random, so it is kind of inconsistent in that way, but if you have Manamorphose already, you can then use Gamble on turn 1 to find a Ruby Medallion or a Ral for turn 2 to combo off. If you don't have Manamorphose, you can get it in your hand. Even if you accidentally discard it to the Gamble trigger, if you have Underworld Breach, you can potentially combo off as well. So whilst we don't have a high redundancy for it, I am still potentially interested to see if we can get Ruby Storm working with Gamble for Manamorphose, and then use Manamorphose and Dragon's Rage Channeler with Underworld Breach to kind of combo off in that way as well. Now again, I do have some concern about that. You might still have to run Strike at Rich plus Bergie, and Bergie is such a slow card in Historic, but definitely something I'm excited to try out there. But yeah, outside of that, I think if this does see play, it is likely to be in a Storm deck like Ruby Medallion or Lotus Field, or just a low to the ground prowess, you know, Is It Wizard style deck, basically. But yeah, very excited to try this one out, and I'm sure there will be some other shells that are very interested in this as well. There definitely have been some brews in the past where I'd have loved to have access to Manamorphose. The next time we've got kind of an interesting one is Slippery Bogle. So we do already have Glade Cover Scout in Historic, and it didn't really take off. I've tested Glade Cover Scout a lot in Auras in Historic, and the big issue with it is that, well, with Glade Cover Scout, was that you really want to build your aura suite differently if you're running hexproof creatures, because they don't get inherent buffs from their own abilities like Core Spirit Dancer or Light Paws do. They can generate power on their own, because Light Paws obviously gets an additional buff for every aura it has on it, and Core Spirit Dancer gets a buff for every aura it has on it, and Light Paws obviously fetches auras to put on top of it, so they both grow way quicker than just generic creatures would do. Whereas if you have a Slippery Bogle and you just put a couple of auras on it, that doesn't really have much of a big impact. You typically want to run more cards like Ethereal Armor, more playsets of cards like All That Glitters. You don't want to be running Shard Mage's Rescue with hexproof creatures, so there's a lot of tension between the generically powerful non-hexproof aura creatures like Core Spirit Dancer and Light Paws that you presumably want to run alongside this, and the hexproof creatures. Now with Glade Cover Scout, it wasn't worth changing the aura suite because you only had one creature that had hexproof. Now that we've got Slippery Bogle as well, tweaking the aura suite in order to run better auras, like auras that draw a card themselves, like Rune of Might that gives you Trample, I think is the name of it, and draws you a card as well. Or like I said, running 4 All That Glitters for Ethereal Armor so that you grow the creature, because these hexproof creatures don't grow on their own. But the issue there is that, you know, I've been theory crafting this again in my head, and if you do run 4 Bogle, 4 Glade Cover Scout, 4 Light Paws, 4 Core Spirit Dancer, if you're running the Light Paws and Core Spirit Dancer, you really do want to be running cards like Shard Mage's Rescue because they're so important with the 2-drops, and then you have the tension with Shard Mage's Rescue being really bad with the hexproof creatures. Not to mention, if you move into green outside of red, you lose access to Demonic Ruckus, and when I'm playing Auras, I really love having 12 1-mana plays, or the deck is just a little bit too slow, whereas if you cut Demonic Ruckus and you move into green, you could potentially run Utopia Sprawl, which does trigger off Core Spirit Dancer and Light Paws, and also opens up the possibility of going turn 1 Sprawl, turn 2 Core Spirit Dancer and Light Paws, and having additional mana up to protect those creatures with a Shard Mage's Rescue. But again, that is built around utilizing Shard Mage's Rescue, which isn't that great with the hexproof creatures. So my thoughts on auras with hexproof is you probably need to go all in on the hexproof creatures. So maybe you could run a build where you go into Bant and you run 4 Slippery Bogle, 4 Glade Cover Scout, 4 Invisible Stalker as well, and then maybe like an Esper Sentinel, and then you have 12 1-mana plays, and then you can tweak your entire aura suite specifically to work well with hexproof creatures. But I don't think this is the right metagame for it right now, because that makes the deck, you basically trade speed for resilience, and that doesn't seem like a good trade-off to be making right now. I think one of the reasons why Auras is so good as a deck right now is because it's so fast and so generically quick. If the opponent doesn't have spot removal for you, you're likely not going to be winning the race against them, whereas if you swap to a hexproof build, sure, you're going to be really good against decks like Jund that have a lot of spot removal, but you're not going to be able to race as consistently against the fast linear, you know, aggro and combo decks that are quite common right now. So not to mention as well that obviously Eldrazi is a very common deck right now, and they have Blast Zone that they can tutor for with Sowing Mica Spawn that is really good against these 1-mana hexproof creatures, and they also have Ugin's Binding that they can, you know, exile from the graveyard when they cast a Null Drifter or another 7-drop to bounce your entire board to get around the hexproof, and obviously board sweepers get around it as well. So I don't think this is good in the current metagame, but in future, if Eldrazi does get hit, I could see a world where Jund suddenly becomes the best deck, and in that sort of format where they have a ton of spot removal, then a hexproof version of Auras could be interesting. But again, Jund is likely to run Culling Ritual, which again is brutal against the hexproof build. So my thoughts on it is, The hexproof creatures don't really work very well with the current auras creatures. There's a lot of tension between them. And so I think if you're going to build hexproof auras, you need to go all in on it. And I think going all in on it isn't very good in the current metagame, is basically my thoughts. But I can see future metagames where it could be the right way to build it if a lot of decks are running a lot of interaction. The next up, we got Fairy Macabre, which is a pretty interesting new graveyard hate tool. We've got kind of reminiscent of Surgical Extraction in a way. So basically, we can discard this to exile up to 2 target cards from the graveyard. The upsides of this is obviously it comes on a creature. So if you are in a situation where you just need to get a creature in play and the opponent isn't interacting with their graveyard, you can obviously just run this out as a 2/2 and attack. You don't have to pay 2 life either, which is quite nice. And obviously, if you have just creature synergies in general, you know, whether that's getting creatures into the graveyard to get some sort of synergy, or whether that's to do with requiring a high density of creatures if you're running something like Birthing Ritual, then this is more appealing as well. But having said that, if you're sideboarding this in as graveyard hate, I don't think it's better than Surgical, because the extraction effect is a huge reason of why Surgical is so effective, especially against combo decks in the format. So I think as graveyard hate, it's another nice option to have, but I think the only reason you would really run this over Surgical is if the 2 life is a really big cost, which shouldn't really be a big issue in Historic, or you really need a high density of creatures. But still, it's a very nice card to have access to. And also let me know in the comments if you think there's another application that I missed of that does give it the edge over Surgical that I didn't mention, because I'm sure there are some really cool stuff that you can do with this in addition to just being useful graveyard hate. The next up, we got Miss Bind Click. Not too much to say about this. I think it's just too slow, and obviously we don't have a fairy deck to be able to use the champion ability. Tapping the opponent's lands during the upkeep is nice, but 4 mana is just too expensive and it doesn't really have a good home right now. Same sort of thing with the Wonderwine Prophets. This does potentially enable infinite turns if you set it up in a Merfolk deck, but it's 6 mana, it needs haste to be effective, it needs evasion to be effective, and you need to be running a bunch of other Merfolk. So unless there's some really broken way to enable this immediately, I don't really see this one seeing play at all. 1000-Year Elixir, though, is a little bit more interesting because there are multiple decks that are very interested in giving your tap abilities haste, like Devoted Druid, for example, like Rona combo. You know, in Elves, Priest of Titania and Elvish Archdruid effects are really nice to be able to give haste to and kind of storm off in the same turn. But we already have effects that do this a little bit better. The 3 mana Tyvar is the first one that comes to mind. And in decks that you want to use the activated ability, you're usually in green, and splashing black isn't too much of an issue anyway. And then in other colours, we do have slightly better effects as well. Like in red, you got Tuk Tuk Rebel Fort that gives your creatures actual haste so you can attack as well. Now I think the advantage of 1000-Year Elixir over those is it is slightly more difficult to interact with. It can't be hit by creature removal, it can't be attacked down like Tyvar can as well, but I don't know, you need a very specific deck where you need a creature that wants to activate its tap ability immediately and couldn't defend a Tyvar. So I mean, maybe the untap ability is useful to have access to as well, but I don't know, this just I just feel like we have better options than this. You need a really specific list where this card being more resilient to interaction is very important. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this does see play in a very fringe deck, but I think we have better options. The next up, we got Heat Shimmer, which is kind of interesting, right? It's a sorcery that you can copy a creature with on either side of the board, and it gets haste and then sacrifices itself. So I mean, the best use I can think of this really is as a sideboard card against a deck that's cheating a big creature like a Traxor or something into play, but I feel like we have better options in all colours really. Decks that cheat big creatures into play aren't really that common at the moment, or if they are, that's not the whole centrepiece of their deck really. So this feels like a very fringe sideboard card for red decks, and it feels like we probably have better options already. Like, you know, if there's a bunch of cards that take control of the opponent's creature, I guess, like I said, the big advantage of this is you do get the ETB, you do get any combat abilities as well, but this is only really good if the opponent's cheating a big creature into play, and there aren't really any decks in Historic that you can use to take advantage of it, but maybe keep it in the back of your mind for future, in case there is a deck that, you know, is very good at cheating Atraxas into play, for example. The next up, we got Dolmen Gate, which prevents combat damage to your attacking creatures, which I don't know, I don't really see a good use of this. I think if you're playing a low to the ground aggressive deck, you just don't want to invest 2 mana in not committing to the board, right? This is going to be at its best in fast aggressive decks, and fast aggressive decks don't want to play a 2 mana artifact that doesn't get more power on the board, really. So unless there's a combo with this or there's something I'm missing, definitely let me know in the comments if you can think of a good application with this, because it does feel like one of those cards where there could be something really cool to do with it, but I just can't think of it. But yeah, the decks you'd want to run this in, fast aggressive decks, just don't want to be investing 2 mana, not impacting the board any further. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if this sees no play whatsoever. Next up, we got Door of Destinies, which is kind of another tribal payoff card, which, again, there isn't really a good tribal deck in Historic right now, and we have a million different options for these sorts of effects, and it feels like we have better ones for this anyway. Not to mention 4 mana is a lot in Historic, so again, another card I wouldn't be surprised if it sees no play. Goblin Sharpshooter, I mean, I've got a bit of a soft spot for this because this is one of the cards that I used to play against when I was a kid back in school, you know, when I actually played Paper Magic. But, you know, in 2026 Historic, this is just going to be doing nothing, right? It's a 3 mana goblin. We have so many better options for 3 mana goblins. So unless it wouldn't surprise me if there's a combo with this. But again, it's quite slow. Again, you need to give it haste for it to be quick enough in a lot of situations as well. So again, wouldn't be surprised if this one sees no play, unfortunately. And then finally, Helix Pinnacle, which is basically just an infinite mana sink that does nothing else, and you have to wait until the upkeep, as opposed to any of the other infinite mana sinks that actually do something else, right? Most infinite mana combos are involving creatures right now, and, you know, like with the Devoted Druid combo, if you're running creatures to generate infinite mana, you're likely running a lot of tutors, and in which case you could just run Duskwatch Recruiter or Thrasios, and I just can't see any use for this, really. You know, the fact you have to wait until the upkeep is the real issue. If you could just, you know, get 100 counters on and immediately win the game, I mean, even that I don't think would be good enough. But the fact you also then have to wait for the upkeep is just, yeah, I think this one is kind of unplayable as well. So those are all the new to Arena cards from this set. And unfortunately, this does look one of the weaker bonus sheets that we've got. And unfortunately, 2 out of the 3 biggest cards that I was excited for in Devoted Druid, Painter Servant, and Manamorphose, 2 out of 3 of them are getting pre-banned as well, which is a little bit annoying. But like I said, I do agree with both of these getting pre-banned. If we had a better mana sink for the Devoted Druid combo that didn't take forever to get through your entire deck, then maybe I could make an argument for that. But still, some people would still run Duskwatch Recruiter, some people would still run Thrasios, and it would just be a nightmare to sit through. If there are any applications of these cards that I missed, especially Manamorphose, this is definitely the card I'm most excited to try out, then definitely let me know in the comments. Like I said, I'm going to be doing the full main set review for Historic, either later this week or early next week, depending on how I get on with other videos and articles and stuff like that as well. So hold tight for that. If there are any other deck ideas that you've got from any of these bonus sheet cards, definitely let me know in the comments. But either way, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Big up.